Everybody, welcome. Thank you very much for joining our session this afternoon on acknowledging and managing anxiety. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Katie Halliday, and I lead the mental health work stream for the Diversity Project. I'm joined today by the Diversity Project's very own lovely Jane Welsh. Jane, welcome. Thank you very much for being here with us today. I will pass over to Jane in one moment, as she will be telling us her own experiences of managing anxiety. But just before we kick off, I should mention that hopefully at the end of the session, we will have some time for some questions and answers. So please do submit them as they come to mind throughout the session. And if you could do that in the Q&A box function, that would be super. So yeah, time for Q&A at the end. Thank you very much. So look, just to kick off and to frame this session, I think it's really important just to mention that we all know that 20% of adults will suffer anxiety in any year. And it's highly likely that we have all experienced anxiety or work or live with people suffering from it. So we really do hope that by kicking off 2021 with our first storytelling session, we'll be able to start this learning journey on this very important topic together. So again, thank you for joining. Now, I will pass over to Jane. Jane, I'll let you introduce yourself properly and start you off as well with a question from me, just around if you can give a quick overview of your career in the investment industry. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Katie. So I fell into the investment industry by accident, really, because when I was at university, I decided that marketing sounded exciting. And I ended up with two job offers. One was with Eastern Gas, and the second was with the London Business School, marketing financial services. And Eastern Gas didn't sound very exciting. And so I joined London Business School, and that's where I got into the investment industry, because my first job was marketing investment software or analysis to asset managers and asset owners. So I fell into it. And after a couple of years there, I moved to what was then Frank Russell as their first full-time manager researcher. And after 7 years with Russell, I moved to Watson's down in Reigate, and as an investment consultant, working with largely UK pension funds on their investment strategy. But I carried on researching asset managers as well. And then most recently, I helped to found the Diversity Project. I'm now a self-employed consultant doing work for the Diversity Project and other organisations.
Great, thank you. So when did you first realise that you were suffering from anxiety, and what triggered it?
Well, I suspect I've suffered from anxiety most of my life, actually, on and off. I certainly remember having bouts of anxiety as a child. But when I really began to suffer from anxiety and it started to have an impact on my working life and my home life was back in the early 2000s. At that point, I was a senior investment consultant with Watson's. I had a portfolio of institutional clients. I was giving them advice on their investment strategy and their manager lineup, etc. I was the mother of two young children, so I was doing that whole kind of juggling thing of being a working mum. And it was also a point in the industry's history where the kind of advice that clients were looking for was also shifting. It was really when things like liability-driven investment and use of derivatives really took off. And that wasn't my skill set. My skill set was really more mainstream investment advice and manager selection and so on. So I was feeling a bit sort of as though my skill set was a bit out of date. And I was also struggling with kind of balancing the whole working mum thing. And I wasn't getting promoted either. So my career had stagnated somewhat. And I wasn't quite sure why that was. But the final straw was when I had to do a repitch for one of my clients. There'd been a change of personnel at the client end. And I think, he and his team had a different idea of what kind of style of advice they were looking for. And I lost the repitch. And at that point, I kind of completely lost confidence in my abilities as a consultant. I thought I was a rubbish mum because I was sort of outsourcing the care of my kids. And I didn't feel valued at work. So yeah, I got kind of angry and teary at home. And I remember my boss describing me as being quite prickly at the time. So yeah, it wasn't a great place to be.
Okay, so what did you do about it, and what was the outcome?
Well, luckily I was spotted that things were not right, and I took myself off to my GP, who was wonderful, and she referred me on to a psychiatrist who diagnosed anxiety and referred me on to some cognitive behavioral therapy. And my therapist was a really quite an academic character. He was based at one of the London universities, and we hit it off, actually. I mean, he shared with me a lot of the theory around cognitive behavioral therapy, and he really outlined to me that this I suppose relationship between sort of negative thoughts leading to negative feelings, leading to negative behavior, and then that sort of vicious cycle carrying on. And he used to set me homework. So each week we would have I'd had to go and do some reading around a particular topic. So I became familiar with concepts like catastrophization, which is quite a word to say, but this idea that you go from one thing going wrong to this sort of assumption that everything will go wrong. Black and white thinking. So, things are either right or wrong. There's no middle ground. And also just the sort of perfectionism. This idea that I should be the perfect mother, the perfect consultant, and really to question all of that. So after 3 months of CBT, I was in a much better place, and felt that I was able to, I suppose, question some of my thinking and some of my thoughts and break that sort of negative spiral.
Great. And what do you do now to keep well?
Yeah, well, I would say I am not cured. I still suffer from anxiety, but I think I'm better at recognizing it now. So I think just knowing that, that it's very common, recognizing when I'm portraying some of those behaviors and going into that sort of negative rumination, I think that is a real help to start with. I think, learning to question your thoughts. Is that real? These negative thoughts, is there any evidence for them? That is a really helpful process to go through. And then there's some sort of self-care. So try and keep fit. I enjoy walking. I do yoga classes. I've taken up running recently, because there is such a connection between physical health and mental health. And I think keeping well physically and eating well and so on is important. And then there are some things that I do on a sort of irregular but reasonably frequent basis. So I took up meditation, and I find some sort of mindfulness type meditation a really good way to stay in the present and stop sort of manage my thought processes. I do journaling from time to time. So if something happens that I'm uncomfortable about, I'll actually write it down. And just the physical act of writing something down, I think, helps me be more dispassionate about it, and again question the negative thoughts that the situation has brought about. I've also more recently taken up keeping a gratitude diary. So, you know, on a regular basis, just jotting down 2 or 3 great things that have happened in a day. And it keeps me in a more positive mindset. So I think that's really helped me stay positive, particularly through COVID, and avoid sort of the negative rumination that I have a habit of going down into.
Some really good pieces of advice there. Thanks, Jane. So what advice would you give to others who might be affected in the same way?
Well, I think seek professional advice. You know, if you're really not well and you recognize that things are not going well, go to your GP or contact your employment assistance provider. Many organizations have mental health first aiders as well. So there may well be people in your own organization that you can have an initial chat with, and they can point you in the right direction. So I think my main piece of advice would be, you know, don't suffer alone. It's important to get support, get some professional help. But there are lots of little things that you can do, the self-help things as well. But the main one would be don't suffer on your own. Talk to somebody.
That's great, thank you. And thank you very much for sharing that with us. It's hugely beneficial. I think it shows how powerful storytelling can be, speaking to somebody who has worked in our industry, hearing from you to hear some of the challenges that you face and some of the feelings that you were having at the time as well, makes it incredibly relevant. And there's certainly, I think, a lot there for each and every one of us on this call to take away. I haven't got any questions yet, so I don't know whether that's the tech failing me or whether everybody's being slightly reserved and shy this afternoon. But the good news is I have some questions. So if I kick off, and then perhaps it might spur a few people into action. So I guess my first question for you, Jane, is when you were initially diagnosed, or afterwards actually, did you disclose your diagnosis in your place of employment? And if not, why not?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I didn't share my situation with my colleagues or my boss. And I've been thinking more recently why that is, because and that's not a criticism of my employer at all. But I clearly wasn't comfortable sharing it. I think there was definitely a sort of suffer in silence kind of attitude that I had. I don't think there was anyone obvious to go and talk to at my employer at the time. And there weren't any obvious role models either. There weren't people in the organization that had talked about their mental health struggles. Everybody seemed to be super successful and super on top of everything. So it didn't feel right to or comfortable sharing it. But I do, you know, I think I should have done, and I'm sure I would have had a very positive experience if I had done that. But it just wasn't talked about. So I didn't feel comfortable doing that at the time.
Got it. Okay, thank you. The questions are coming in thick and fast now, so we'll go over to the Q&A box. So the first one is, what advice do you have for a manager that manages somebody with anxiety?
Well, I think probably, and I'm about to go on a mental health first aid course, so which I would probably recommend to anyone who's in a sort of people management role. Because I think that will equip you to have those kinds of conversations. But I think probably the first thing is just to listen, and just to not judge, not try and, you know, don't tell them to pull themselves together, but just to listen to their situation. And if you can encourage them to go and seek, you know, help from a mental health first aider or their GP or whatever. but basically to be there to listen. I think that's probably the biggest thing that you can do. And then perhaps also to reflect. There is a danger that we pass on our own stress to others. So perhaps to reflect on, is there anything that I as their line manager, is there anything that I could be doing differently? Am I passing on my stress to them without realizing it? Am I contributing? That's not to beat yourself up, but to just reflect on that.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question. This is an interesting one. How can you make other people understand, particularly those that don't totally buy into the concept of poor mental health?
So how can you well, I think the storytelling probably helps. There are probably quite a few people that I've worked with in the past who may be surprised by what I've just shared today and say, well, I never saw that. So I think if we could encourage more people and more leaders in organizations to share their mental health issues and struggles, that would be fantastic, because it would normalize it and help people to realize that it's much more common than perhaps some people think. So I would encourage people to share their stories. I mean, there's so many statistics about the proportion, as you did at the beginning, Katie, you highlighted just how common these different, and there's lots of other sort of mental health issues that people can experience, and they are very, very common. So the statistics speak for themselves, really. We are all working with people who are struggling with mental health issues.
Yeah, agree. Thank you. Okay, just looking down the questions, Jane, might give you a break just for 1 minute, just so you can take a breath and have a sip of a cup of tea, and perhaps I'll take a question. So somebody kindly did direct a question to me, actually, which is very timely and very poignant. So the question is, question maybe more for Katie, do you have any recommendations on books, story style, that would help kids who worry a lot or may be anxious? So the answer is not right now off the top of my head. However, the good news is the work stream of the diversity project that is focusing on mental health is actually thinking about the content that we want to share through our web page, and one of those things is actually reading lists and recommendations. So that won't just be reading, but that will also be audiobooks and podcasts as well. Now, one of the things that we will be focusing on is the different age brackets within society, and how we can be slightly more pointed in the recommendation, advice and best practice that we give to each of those age brackets. And the first focus will actually be the under 14s. So the answer to your question is not right now, but watch this space, because yeah, it's something that we want to do. And if you wanted to reach out to me separately afterwards, I do have some contacts in various different organizations, and I'm sure I could get some recommendations for you. So more than happy to do that. You aren't asked the question anonymously, but you can reach me through the diversity project, and I'll do what I can to help and guide. Great. Okay, on to the next question. Now, this is maybe a slightly controversial one, but I think it's worth a bit of a discussion point. Does anxiety only happen in one's head, or does it also do something with your body?
It certainly did for me. I know that I've sort of I developed a twitch from time to time. I've had headaches. I've had trouble sleeping. So I think anxiety does affect you physically as well as mentally. So definitely for me, it's both mental and physical. And of course, then the physical makes you feel worse, so you're more vulnerable, you're less resilient. So it can become a negative spiral if you're not careful.
Absolutely. Okay, next question. So obviously you didn't disclose your anxiety diagnosis at the time, but there was a question on here as to whether you got any additional support from your employer. So I wonder whether, you know, as your behaviours changed and as your symptoms were more noticeable, did you get sort of recognition and extra support, or were things just left to solve themselves?
I think I hid it, to be honest. It wasn't something that I was comfortable sharing with my employer. So, and that, I say, it's not a criticism of my employer at all. Um, and I think attitudes have changed even in this. I mean, we're talking here the early 2000s. So, nearly 20 years ago, that some of this. So I think attitudes have also changed, and many of the larger firms now have mental health first aiders. They have line manager training around these topics. They're better able to recognize it. I think if I was in the same situation now, it would be very different. I'd hope it would be very different anyway.
Absolutely. Okay. Next question. What do you think employers can do to create an environment where people do feel comfortable in being more open? So I think you touched on this already with the storytelling. I certainly have a few ideas, but maybe if you want to go first, then I'll see what I can add.
Yeah, well, I think the whole mental health first aid, sort of accepting that that it isn't just first aid, but it's mental health first aid. I think if companies can really emphasize that and invest in that, that says a lot, and it provides that sort of first responder, I suppose, layer of support for individuals, and it says a lot about an organization that they're investing in that. So I think those would be the things that I would highlight: the storytelling and the first aid.
Yeah, I agree. I think the top down approach is a must. So, at C-suite level, we have to get, the execs buy-in that this is something that the company wants to focus on and really take seriously. I know that some organizations have had real success in storytelling campaigns and rolling out the mental health first aid. So I think that is so important. And the Diversity Project and the mental health workstream are actually going to be running some sessions on mindfulness and on sort of benefits that employers can give their employees to focus on sort of resilience, etc. And we're actually looking to target maybe that level of non-believers / naysayers to your meditation, your yoga, your mindfulness, etc., because actually we need the people who are making the decisions to really believe in this. So when they talk about the benefits for their employers that are available, it is true, it is believable, it is credible, and there's buy-in from top of the house down. So yeah, completely agree. Great. Okay. Maybe time just for a couple more questions. What advice would you give someone that has friends or loved ones that suffer from anxiety?
Well, I suppose it's a little bit like how the advice to a line manager. It's just to be there for them, and to listen, to encourage, and not to judge. And so I don't know that I've got anything to add there. I don't know, Katie, if you've got any thoughts.
No, I don't think so. I think we're going to learn a lot on our mental health first aid course. And I've been studying some of the material, so I'm attending the course with Jane, and I'm learning a lot about the mental health first aid mantra, which is algae. So this is how you approach a situation, and I would say for anybody that wants some recommendation or advice, it might be an idea to look on the Mental Health First Aid England website, because you do get some really good content around how you would approach a situation and some of the really useful things that you can help to do somebody in a situation that perhaps they're in crisis, or perhaps they are just displaying signs of anxiety, for example. So I think there's a lot of useful professional guidance and information there. So I would say, read up, and if you are really concerned about somebody, the first thing to do is just try to talk to them and listen to them non-judgmentally. That's the biggest thing.
There's a question in here about deep breathing and whether that's a way of helping with anxiety. And I've certainly found that to be very helpful. I think just putting your feet on the ground so that you feel grounded, breathing, focusing on your breath. It's a mindfulness exercise, actually, but it does really help to calm the mind, and give you a chance to sort of move on. Definitely think that the breath and focusing on the breath can be very, very helpful in managing anxiety in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. Jane, time for maybe one or two more questions if we try and finish up at half
We've
past.
got a quarter of an hour, haven't we? So we've got time for some more here, I think.
Perfect. Okay, do you want to read down the list and pick a few,
I
or
think
do you want me
there's
to
one there
carry on?
about perfectionism.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting, that one, because it links to imposter syndrome, actually. Perfectionists, if they feel like they have failed, can feel as though they're an imposter, and it can completely undermine their sort of self-esteem. I think I have become better at sort of accepting that an 80% job is actually probably good enough. So I think I have learned over time to let go. Maybe that's a function of age. Maybe there are cycles to this through your career when you feel sort of more vulnerable or less vulnerable. So I think I have got better at managing my inner perfectionism. The inner demons, you just got to put them back in their box, really.
There's another great question in here, Jane. Have you found that this has helped you become a better leader or people manager?
Well, it's interesting. I think there's always sort of good sides and bad sides to these things. I think understanding my own vulnerability has probably helped me, be as a manager of others, because I'm probably I'd probably ask a few more questions of people, and so yes, I think anything that allows you to sort of, if you start to understand yourself, then I think you're in a better position to try and understand others and show empathy. So I think it isn't all bad. The sort of anxiety can also be a great motivator to do better. If you're always worrying about getting found out, or not being good enough, it can actually push you on to strive to be better. So yeah, it can certainly have a positive side to it.
Absolutely. Okay, just looking down, there's just a few more questions in here. So the one that caught my eyes, when mental health help wait lists are 9 to 12 months after initial consultation with a GP, it's such an uphill battle to get help. How do you stay motivated or not become demoralized by the situation?
I mean, I was very fortunate in that I had private healthcare through my work. And so I didn't have that 9 to 12 month wait, which is just horrendous. We have underinvested in our mental health provision in this country. I think it must be just like it is, being on the waiting list for a new hip or whatever. I think it must be awful to have to wait that long. I was very fortunate in that I didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And just sticking on the GP/medical theme, somebody's commented here saying that their GP wasn't very supportive when it was found that the person had anxiety. They just gave the person antidepressants, sorry. And then I think this person said that they discovered a man called David Johnson from New Zealand, Freedom from Fear Recovery Program, that really helped. So thank you to the person that posted that for sharing. Jane, I just wonder whether you might have had any alternatives, as well as obviously the exercise, the meditation, etc., that you found. Did you join any sort of other program, or do you have any sort of recommendations for podcast reading, etc.? If not on the tip of your tongue right now, maybe that's something that we could publish up after this call.
There's a few things. There's an organization called Action for Happiness, which sounds a bit naff, but it's a wonderful organization. And it's really all about positive psychology. And positive psychology can get a bit of a bad rap. People think it's all happy clappy and so on. But really, it's about a lot of the things we've talked about today. It's about mindfulness. It's about challenging your negative thoughts. It's about finding ways to stay well. which could be, physical health or mental health. So, and they run all sorts of podcasts and webinars and lots of materials on their website. So I'd definitely recommend that organization. I have Headspace downloaded on my phone, and I do their mindfulness exercises. I think that that works for me, and so again, I'd recommend that. So I think those would be the things that I've found the most useful.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that is great, and we'll take a note of those and try to publish up some links and some recommendations, as I say, as content on the webpage as well. Great. Okay. Next question. This is a great question, actually. How best should you cope with people who raise or cause anxiety? Not because they are being horrible people, just their personalities and their personal communication style. So I think we've probably all experienced interactions like that at some point in our lives or careers. But do you have any wisdom or advice on that one?
Yeah, I talked earlier, didn't I, about people transmitting their stress, and we, as you say, we've all worked with people who do that, and perhaps we're just not very good at calling it out. I think they probably would be horrified if they knew that the way that they behaved or the messaging they gave was actually making it more stressful for others. So I would say encourage people to speak up and raise it if they feel that it's safe. I mean, you have to be working in a sort of psychologically safe environment to be able to do that. If it's your boss, it's quite tricky. But I think if you can find ways not to work with those people, or if they're friends that pass on stress, maybe they're not doing you any good. So don't put up with it, I suppose, is the bottom line.
Very good advice. Thank you. Okay. Is there a way to cope with circumstances out of your control? For example, worrying about a loved one's health.
Yes, that's tricky, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know that I've got a good answer for that one. I think that's just terribly difficult to deal with.
It is, and I think that some of the mindfulness techniques around meditation and breathing can help you try to put things into perspective. So the initial output of using mindfulness or breathing techniques is a certain level of calmness. So just thinking about your breathing, etc., might just give you that moment of having a break to sort of help you sort of get some clarity, maybe. So that's something that I would recommend. And I know myself, speaking from my own personal experiences, I've had huge amounts of worry and anxiety during COVID. Actually, I've got a mother who's on the sort of severely at risk register for catching COVID. She's clinically vulnerable, and I've spent an awful lot of time worrying about her and almost obsessing around what she's doing to keep herself safe, and offering at ridiculous hours of the day and night to go and do her shopping so she doesn't have to get any exposure at all. But actually talking to her about how I was feeling and talking to her about the measures that she was taking to protect herself actually got me feeling a bit more comfortable that she was doing everything she could to be okay. So it's a bit of an age-old adage, but I would say definitely have a conversation. If it's not with the person directly, somebody who understands your concerns and fears, perhaps somebody that concerns their health condition, perhaps that you're concerned about, and actually try to apply some facts, and that might help you rationalize slightly as well.
Yeah.
Okay. On to the next question. What is the relationship between anxiety and stress, which is perhaps more widely recognised and identified?
There's probably a technical answer to that, isn't there, Katie? Which is probably beyond me. I mean, a certain amount of stress can be quite powerful, actually. It can kind of drive you on. But it's at what point does it become so excessive that it starts to make you ill. And I think there's a sweet spot in there. But I'm sure, Katie, you've probably got a more technical answer to give.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not a health professional. However, what I will say is we ran a fantastic session last year with a GP Terry, who is a specialist in stress management, actually, and he spoke around a lot of the science behind this, as well as with some of the coping techniques. I'm not 100% sure, but the session may have been recorded and might be posted up on the website. If it's not, we're actually planning on running another one this year. So he is a friend of the Diversity Project, and we should definitely try to get a more formal answer to that question, I think, because it's relevant, and I think there are certainly links. But yeah, I'm not a professional, so I'm not comfortable answering, but there's certainly some information that we can get and get that posted up there as well. So thank you for asking. Great. Okay, I'm just looking at the time. I think we have a few more questions. This is a really good one, Jane, and I think I'm sure you'll be able to give some insight into this. At what point would you suggest getting professional help, CBT, etc.? Is it something we should all be doing to prevent getting into a difficult point, and so we can better help friends and colleagues?
Well, I don't think everybody needs CBT, but I definitely think that it doesn't work for everybody either. But I think if you are suffering from, if you're diagnosed with anxiety, it is one of the things that you should consider doing. But there's lots of other ways that you can help with, you know, mild anxiety and stress, the things that we've talked about. So the mindfulness, the breathing exercises, and so on. So I think CBT I think it's a very effective tool, but it won't necessarily be right for everybody.
Yeah, agree. Thank you. Okay, so the last question that we've got open it is, I think, for me or for you, Jane, but I'll take it. Does the Diversity Project have a LinkedIn page? Yes, we absolutely do. We have our website, and we're also active on LinkedIn as well. So I think you can find that just by searching for the Diversity Project. So please, if you're not already following, do so, because there's a lot of information that we post out there, and a lot of information about the events that we run as well. Any problems, as I mentioned before, just give me a shout directly through the Diversity Project, and I can give you some guidance on that. And the last, it's more of a comment than a question actually in here, is just a recommendation actually. So we've got Breen or Bren Brown's
Brené Brown.
Brené Brown, thank you. Brené Brown's Rising Strong book and TED Talks are good around vulnerability and shame and understanding people. So thank you to whoever posted that recommendation. That's certainly one that I will be learning to say first, and then looking up over the weekends and listening to. So thank you. Okay, that's the end of the Q&A. Jane, is there anything else from your side before we let everybody go for their Friday afternoons?
No, but thank you very much for everybody listening and contributing your great questions. And yeah, I hope that this will be part of a series of stories that people share about their mental health challenges. And wouldn't it be great if we could normalize conversations about these topics in our industry?
Yeah, thank you, Jane, so much for sharing all of this with us this afternoon. I appreciate it. I know that it's been a really insightful session for everybody. I will just close by asking or giving a bit of a call to action. So Jane is right. Hopefully this will promote some storytelling. If there is anybody on the call that might be happy to contribute to a similar session in the future, or that knows somebody that might be, please do get in touch and reach out. I'm sure you all agreed that this has been a really powerful session, and we would love to be able to replicate with other stories over the course of the next year or so. So yeah, please do get in touch if you think you can help. Brilliant. Great stuff. Thanks a lot, Jane. Thanks a lot all. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much.
See
Bye.
you. Bye bye.